Welcome to a post-manga Dragon Ball Dissection world. Thank you so much for all of your amazing comments on the last episode. Not only were they very kind, it was incredibly cool seeing so many of you share your own life's journeys and how they paralleled Dragon Ball Dissection. It blows my mind how many of you said, I was in middle school when it started, or I was in high school and now I'm a lawyer. I'm glad to have been a constant through so many phases of your lives, and I'm flattered that you've kept me around for so long. But there's plenty more Dragon Ball to talk about, like today's example. Dragon Fist Explosion, if Goku won't do it, who will? The 13th Dragon Ball Z movie premiered on July 15th, 1995. The same time in the TV series sees Vegito fighting Majin Buu. In the manga, well, there is no manga. It had been over for about a month and a half. The title is another one of those that, while lengthy, is fairly specific to this movie. You're certainly not going to confuse it for any other movie. It's also a terrible title because it's only relevant for about 5 seconds of said movie, which otherwise has nothing to do with Goku or the Ryuken. The title's first half refers to the finishing move that has no setup, no relevance, and no connection to anything else in the movie. What even is it? I don't know. It looks cool, I guess. Let's continue to make up titles before writing the story and see where that gets us. The second half is likewise crammed into the very end of the film. It even gets a title drop where Goku literally asks that question. If Goku won't do it, who will is at least quite amusing when taken as a self-aware confession about Dragon Ball movies or Dragon Ball as a whole. An old man named Hoi seeks out the Dragon Team for their help in opening an enchanted music box that contains a legendary hero named Tapion. With the help of the Dragon Balls, it's no problem. However, Tapion is less than thrilled to be free, and it turns out that Hoi's motivations might have been less than pure. Tapion's imprisonment is actually the last barrier holding in check a ferocious monster, Hirudegarn. Like many of the DBZ films, it shares some of the core beats common to them. There's a searching for Dragon Balls montage, there are underdeveloped villains, Vegeta shows up partway through with a quip and then proceeds to get beaten down. It all ends with a big fight. And as the title states, if Goku doesn't do it, who will? It also repurposes ideas from the series. Hoi bears more than a slight resemblance to Bobby D, and is likewise referred to as a Madoshi. His plan is to resurrect a monster of his clan's creation who has been sealed away. That monster, Hirudegarn, is referred to as a Genmajin, combining the kanji of phantom, magic or demon, and person. The official subtitles refer to it as phantasm. But still, we have a Madoshi using a Majin to take over the world. Sounds kinda familiar. Hirudegarn absorbs people with its tail, leaving empty clothes behind, and transforms by emerging from a chrysalis, so there are definitely shades of Cell to this villain as well. With all that out of the way though, it seems this movie aspires to be a little more than simply a watered-down excuse for extended action scenes. I'm not going to say that Dragon Fist Explosion is thought-provoking or emotionally complex. However, it is a very different Dragon Ball Z film. That's obvious right off the bat, as it dispenses with the opening sequence from the television series. It shows a quick Dragon Ball Z title card and overlays its opening credits on the narrative itself. Several DBZ movies establish a bare minimum of plot and character before jumping into the action. The designated leisure activity of the film, as I call it. This film is 51 minutes long, and while there are brief action beats scattered throughout, the final battle scene only starts up at the 35-minute mark, 2/3 of the way in. You already have my attention based on that fact alone. What fills that first half hour plus is characters talking, characters spending time together, characters discussing feelings and figuring things out. Different characters have different storylines. Gohan and Videl get to play superhero and go to school. Trunks yearns for a connection he's lacking in his day-to-day life. Bluma tries to bridge that gap for her son. I'm probably making it sound better than it is. Like I said, this is not complex. It doesn't go deep into any of these things, and it struggles to even handle some of those things competently. I'll certainly get into that as we continue on. However, I don't want to get too into the weeds without acknowledging how much I'd rather have Dragon Ball films that are like this, that focus on the story and characters over the mindless action. It might even be fair to say that this is one of the few of these that feels like a real movie. So I am in a bit of a bind here. These movies in general set something of a low bar, which affects my expectations. Because of that, I don't want to go too far in either direction. I don't want to blindly praise this film simply for hitting the bare minimum of what I expect a decent story to do. At the same time, though, I don't want to minimize how much this movie manages to rise above the sludge when it seemingly didn't have to. I applaud that, and I give credit where it's due. With all that established, let me get into the details, both good and bad. The title really sells this movie short because it tries to be a bit different, attempts to place a slightly greater emphasis on character. And that character is not Goku, it's Trunks. The movie is clearly aware of this given how Kusao Takeshi is given second billing in this movie, directly after Nozawa herself. Now obviously the Boo Arc era movies have already cast their lots in with Goten and Trunks, presenting them as your typical fun-loving shonen protagonists. They're relegated to a B-plot in the previous film, and this movie looks like it's set to do the same thing, with early movie antics placing them as cogs in the machine. Instead, much to the chagrin of the Goten fans, Trunks receives a unique spotlight. He imprints onto the main guest character of the film, admiring him as a hero and as a potential big brother figure. While the boys themselves never discuss it, Bluma suggests at one point that Trunks might be jealous of Goten having a big brother. The main guest character in turn comes to see some of his own lost little brother in Trunks. It's kind of a sweet idea, that of trauma healing through found family. Tapion, named for Tapioca, is the main guest character in question. He's an ancient hero from the planet Coconuts, in the southern galaxy. He has been sealed in a music box because his body in turn has been used to seal away an ancient evil that had once rampaged his home planet. In fact, this ancient evil is so powerful that Tapion alone is unable to seal the entire beast. He holds the top half, his little brother Minotia holds the bottom half. Minosia's fate is, wisely, left slightly ambiguous. Hoi clearly already has access to Minosia's half of Hirudegarn, leading to the odd spectacle of the early fights consisting of simply a pair of legs attacking the city. Tapion bluntly surmises that his brother is probably dead. It's never carried beyond that. There's no search for Minotia, there's no reveal that he's actually okay. It's simply accepted as fact that he's dead because it's probably true. It's almost certainly true. The teaser of the film shows Minotia being stepped on by his half of the monster, and it's up to us to imagine how a chain of events culminated in that moment. Perhaps Hoi did the same thing on another planet that he's doing here. We don't need to see any of that, we don't need that confirmed, it's more affecting to put the details together. We also don't need Tapion to be obsessed with Minotia, wasting away in melodramatic denial over him. His grief is subtle, but always apparent. There are enough moments of flashback to understand Tapion's backstory, but what sells it better are the indirect emotions, which are represented through his relationship with Trunks. With Trunks becoming a proxy for Minotia, Tapion's various reactions make more sense, both his affections towards him and also his initial hostility. There's a very important shot when Tapion finally warms to Trunks and consents to play with him. A mechanical robot toy falls over and splits in two. It's a reminder to Tapion that he is duty-bound and can't let down his guard. Trunks is babbling random kid stuff in the background, oblivious all the while to what Tapion is going through, because he has the luxury to be so carefree. Tapion wants to be able to discard his responsibility and play with toys without being reminded that he can't allow himself to be that person. Trunks wants to be the kind of hero that Tapion is, romanticizing the idea without recognizing the sacrifice such a life entails. And the movie doesn't need to tell us this directly with the kind of agonizingly blunt flashback we get a la Paragus in the Broly movie. It's not vomited out in a monologue where the characters say exactly how they feel. Instead, it's communicated through the story, scattered naturally through interactions, reactions, decisions. The story trusts the audience to understand what it's trying to tell without grabbing you by the face and yelling, "Hey, you get it? You get it? This is what Tapion is all about." We only get a flashback to establish the mechanical aspects, how Hirudegarn works and why Tapion was in a music box. This ends up being one of the few movies that focuses on an original good guy character instead of a villain. Movie 11 has Jaga and his minions, who are somewhat antagonistic but ultimately not allied with the villain. Movies 3 through 5 feature Higher Dragon as Gohan's pet. It's always been about the villains in these DBZ movies, which so easily allows the story to be swallowed up by the action. When the villains aren't interesting, it usually ends up sinking the movie. Because of how focused this is on Tapion, it not only allows the story to thrive outside of fight, it makes it far more trivial that Hirudegarn is a nothing character. He doesn't really need to be anything more than a thrashing kaiju smashing buildings. It's not about him, it's about the threat he poses through his connection to Tapion. The most interesting thing about Hirudegarn is the story behind his ludicrous name. He is named for the movie's assistant producer, Hiruta Seiichi. They decided to name their villain after Hiruta, which caused him to react in shock. The Japanese onomatopoeia for shock is God. Put all that into a blender and you get Hirudegarn. Yeah, it's ridiculous, but, his nemesis is Tapioca Guy from the planet of coconuts. And that Tapioca Guy is cool. He's just the right level of brooding and tortured without becoming an irritant. It's understandable why he's angry at being released. He has a cool design, and the ceiling melody he plays on his ocarina gets in your head. It's iconic, if played a few too many times throughout the movie. At first, when the music box plays, it's suitably beautiful and sad. But by the end of the movie, it's gotten a bit tiresome, just a prelude to the inevitable failure of being interrupted by Hirudegarn smashing him. The movie predates it by a few years, but pointy-eared cool guy with a sword who constantly plays an ocarina? Yeah, there are definitely a lot of N64 Legend of Zelda vibes from this guy. He even has a near-identical young version of himself who does the same thing. Okay, I've said all that. Now it's time for me to achieve balance. Let's look at the scene where Trunks gets his hands on the ocarina just in time for Hoi to arrive and force him to make a choice. Return it to Tapion, or give it to Hoi. Who do you trust, Trunks? The person who has led you to all of this intrigue, or the one who has treated you like crap? It's supposed to be a big moment when Trunks chooses Tapion because it marks the shift when the heroes start trusting the right person instead of the one who's been manipulating them. But Tapion has done literally nothing up to this point to earn Trunks' trust, and barely seems bothered by that in this scene. Instead, it comes across that Trunks chooses Tapion because he likes the cool hero guy more than the crusty old man. And, he's a little boy. That's fine. We don't expect kids to have good judgment. He's the typical Dragon Ball fan. He'll pick what's cool and flashy every time. So why am I even bringing this up? I bring it up because it encapsulates the entire cast's reactions to all of these crazy happenings. They all come across as completely stupid, or at least uninterested in doing any due diligence before granting people access to potentially earth-shattering magic and technology. They immediately fall in with Hoi. Once they learn he's not what they thought he was, they immediately fall in with Tapion. But they have no more reason to believe his stories than they do the guy who just screwed them over. It seems like they'd be a little more discerning after the first time, and Hoi alone is suspicious enough that it seems ridiculous that almost no one seriously questions him. They find out pretty early that Hoi engineered their first meeting because he knew they had access to the Dragon Balls. Goku actually catches Hoi admitting he's an alien, although the latter passes it off as a figure of speech. And that one's written so weird, I don't even know if the characters are to blame for it. The guy is making open references to the Southern Galaxy from the moment he's introduced. He has pink skin and catfish whiskers, and this is well past the point where Dragon Ball's Earth is a fantasy world with wacky characters. So, I'm not sure if the movie knows if Hoi is supposed to be hiding the fact that he's an alien. Even in that scene, Goku doesn't act like he's caught Hoi slipping up. He just seems excitedly curious that Hoi might be from another planet. What difference does it make? The only character not immediately impressed by Hoi is Videl, which I would like, and I want to like. I just don't understand her in this movie. Every time I think I get what her motivation is, it suddenly jumps to something completely different, and then I have to start over from scratch. Let me just walk you through this. Videl and Gohan return to class after stopping crime only to immediately be called back into action because there's a man threatening to throw himself off the Raenzel Tower. Videl balks that they're not needed for this, which, while probably true, seems a bit cold to say in response to a potential suicide. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt, though, that their education is being interrupted, that this is their volunteer work as opposed to their job, and she feels a bit taken advantage of. Moving ahead to the next scene, Videl tells Hoi to cut the crap and just jump. She's a superhero, not a social worker. Nobody ever put her on a hotline. However, this made sense to me. She and Gohan can fly and can easily catch him. The sooner he jumps, the sooner they can put him in the hands of someone who can actually help him. It's cruel, but it's logical. Apparently, though, that was not her plan, as she is totally surprised by him falling and Gohan has to save him instead. When they do get Hoi safely to the ground and Hoi begins plying them with tales of imprisoned heroes, Gohan is all in while Videl is suspicious. And I do have to say, I find Gohan's reaction very cute. Again, they're all idiots to trust him as much as they do, but an initial excitement is understandable. Plus, I can't help but look at this scene and notice a fun contrast between Gohan and his father. Goku could be manipulated by this geezer with the promise of meeting someone really strong. Gohan, however, who has fashioned himself as a superhero, is taken in by tales of heroic valor. That's an appropriate character beat. It just doesn't explain anybody else. Tapion really shouldn't be that big of a deal to these people. This is pretty standard stuff for them. Videl is the only one who's seeing this story as mundane as it probably should be to the rest of them. After a bit, she forces Hoi to admit he staged his suicide attempt in order to talk to her and Gohan specifically. At that point, I thought I finally figured her out. There is a bit of background dialogue where a random rubbernecker says he saw Hoi on TV talking about magic music boxes. So my thought was that Videl immediately suspected this was a con, and that had been influencing all of her behavior. She calls his bluff and refuses to be taken in by his stories because he has proven himself untrustworthy. I thought that was pretty clever, making her come across as unreasonable before demonstrating she has reason to doubt him. Nope. A couple of scenes later, she's cooing over the idea of getting to meet a real live hero. What is happening here? Nothing has changed. Why are her reactions all over the map? Why does she want old men to kill themselves? What is up with this guy's face? Why is this hero business drawing everyone in so easily when it rightly should elicit the same reaction as the Elder Kaioshin drawing out someone's latent power? Videl, you are a superhero! And she really is, so let me revel in that for a moment. Videl's unexplainable bug up her butt aside, one of my favorite elements introduced in this movie concerns the Gohan and Videl dynamic. You might recall that the last movie depicts Videl fighting crime alongside Great Saiyaman, with Videl finally expressing appreciation for all the silly posing Gohan does. In what might be considered a rare example of inter-movie continuity, this takes that relationship to its next step. As you've certainly already noticed, Videl has her own costume this time around. They are now a Great Saiyaman team, with Gohan rechristened as Great Saiyaman number 1 and Videl newly minted as Great Saiyaman number 2. And I love this so much! It's such a wonderfully full arc for her and shows them working as a couple in perfect concert. If you'll indulge my own fan stories for a bit, this is one of those things I was introduced to in a partial capacity long before it was officially released in the West. I've mentioned him before, but I was a big fan of Ginga Giri Giri's Castor Troy when I was a teenager, and I loved his AMVs, my favorite of which from 2000 included a sequence of the Great Saiyaman team. I went totally gaga over that, and to this day I cannot see that dip without getting chills. That this movie devotes time to furthering Gohan's and Videl's story again demonstrates that the focus this time around is on character. I love that Gohan still tries to explain away his school absences by claiming he's in the bathroom, even though, as Schopner points out, everyone knows who he is. The one thing I don't like is that they still have Gohan in that stupid bandana and sunglasses, even though he's no longer in a tournament. Videl has a perfect Great Saiyaman helmet as part of her costume. Don't you know anything about coordinating, you dumb nerd? Moving back to things that don't make sense to me, once Tapion has warmed up to Trunks, Bluma offers to make a new music box for him. And this is all kinds of weird. See, it's been demonstrated that Tapion can't fall asleep if he wants to keep his section of Hirudegarn at bay. The one time he drifts off, the beast almost breaks free. but she says they have the remnants of the original box and she can study it. Now, I've always assumed the music box itself was immaterial. It's like the rice cooker or the bottle. Those are just vessels. It's whatever the magic is that's keeping Tapion sealed away. Bluma doesn't do magic, she does tech. So I practically laughed out loud when she said she was going to study the music box. And the result is just a giant version of the music box. It has the same design motifs, it has moving gears on the inside. I feel like Bluma completely misunderstands the assignment here. She euphemistically refers to it as Tapion's bedroom, and that really seems to be all it is. Nothing appears to keep Hirudegarn in check. Tapion's not sealed in there, he just has a bed. And once again, I'm not sure the movie disagrees with me on this, as Tapion's bedroom doesn't do diddly squat. The moment he falls asleep, Hirudegarn gets free. Why does the movie even bother with this? Is it supposed to be useless, or does it work but Hirudegarn has just become that powerful? Logically, the former makes more sense to me, but Tapion's dialogue suggests it's the latter. At least if it's a bust, it allows Tapion to lower his guard enough for Hirudegarn to escape. But if it is because the monster's getting stronger, Tapion's bedroom serves no narrative function. Nothing would change if it didn't exist. Conversely, if Bluma's plan is as stupid as I think it is, Tapion becomes as careless as the others, as he never really questions that Bluma can successfully pull this off. That's probably because the movie's not long enough to explore any of these things, but it doesn't make any sense he wouldn't. His whole motivation is his sense of duty towards keeping the beast within. There's no way he'd blindly trust someone who only has the most cursory knowledge of his problem to be able to solve it on the first try. So take your pick over which explanation is less bad. On the flip side of that, there comes a point where Tapion decides he has to die in order to stop Hirudegarn. Logically, there doesn't seem to be any reason why he can't simply kill himself, but instead he orders Trunks to do it. This, however, I'm okay with, as it's more thematically appropriate to force Trunks to make that decision. Not only does he have to reconcile what it means to truly be a hero, that it's not just Gotenks making up fun attack names, he has to kill this person who means a lot to him. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean all that much as the moment is interrupted right before it can happen, and I'd almost be able to forgive it for that if the exact same "oh, we're just a second too late" thing hadn't happened during the Tapion's bedroom scene. They start to feel like cheap fake-outs. The main thing I'm getting at here is that this movie succeeds when it comes to emotion, it fails when it has to show its work in regards to logic. To an extent, I'm fine with that, but very little here seems thought out. The most famous example of this is, of course, Tapion's sword. Throughout the movie, he wields a very familiar-looking sword. At the end, when Tapion travels 1,000 years into the past, with the time machine that this timeline's Bluma apparently has, Tapion gives the sword to Trunks. Now, even though this looks exactly like future Trunks' sword, I'd be willing to believe that it's just a coincidence, a visual callback meant to show that this Trunks is finally growing into his alternate self's shoes, becoming the same type of hero now that he's had the chance to mature. And maybe that is what they're going for. But then when the credits start and the movie cuts from our Trunks to that Trunks using his sword to kill Frieza, you start to wonder, wait, do they actually think they're writing the origin for that Trunks' sword? Because they do know that's not possible, right? That's not what they're saying, is it? I don't know. The movie so often twists logic in order to force emotional resonance that it's honestly hard to be sure. Finally, I have a few random things to point out. I'm sure people would be angry if I didn't mention that Vegeta is in this movie. Technically, I mentioned it earlier. He's barely in this, which is weird considering how much of a focus there is on Trunks. The two never even interact. He shows up angry that Hirudegarn wrecked his house. He fights for a few seconds before getting beaten up, and then he's never seen again. That's why I don't have anything to say about it other than, hey, he goes down protecting random people. Good for him. At least he cares. I'm also fairly certain this is the origin of the giant back balcony of Capsule Corporation. There have been earlier scenes in the Cell arc that take place on balconies, but they're small and extend off from the main structure. This thing carves out a quarter of the building. It's always looked weird to me. It's also something I very much associate with Dragon Ball Super. So many of its scenes take place on that balcony. To me, it's emblematic of how that show resets the status quo so often. I frequently make derisive jokes about how all the storylines end with a barbecue at Capsule Corporation, and while I'm not sure if that's literally true, it's this balcony I always think of. Because of that, it blows my mind that this is what establishes it. Kame Sennin appears briefly, and unfortunately Miyauchi Kohei does not perform the role. He passed away a month before this movie released, and apparently never had the chance to record for it. Sadly, in the 21st century, Dragon Ball actors passing away is becoming all too common, but in 1995, I think it's fair to say he was the first major DB actor we lost. The worst part is, it's easy to not even notice his absence if you're just watching the series. Remember, his character was killed off during the Buu arc, months before Miyauchi's own death. After the character returns, I'm pretty sure he only has a speaking role in one subsequent episode of Dragon Ball Z, and it's only as a background event. Toei would experiment with various replacements over the years, but in this case the role is taken over by Sato Masaharu, who has ultimately become the permanent replacement in modern Dragon Ball. Given how often I've heard him in recent years, this is the first time I've watched this movie where I hardly find it jarring anymore. Sato is definitely the best of the replacements, but Miyauchi is always the voice I expect to hear coming out of the Muten Roshi. This movie released before the end of the animated series, but it is relatively easy to place into the timeline if that's your thing. The fact that Goku and Vegeta are back and alive seems to indicate this was in production by the time Toriyama was working on the ending, or that they at least had knowledge of what the ending would be. Remember, the last movie came out only 4 months before this one, and kept them very much dead. At the point in the animated series when this was released, Vegeta is only temporarily on Earth. Somehow, they managed to get this right. There's a whole 10 years of completely, totally empty space where nothing happens, where this movie can fit. On the flip side though, this movie launches so many fandom wars as it depicts Gohan's awful-looking powered-up form as something he transforms into, not something that has permanently changed him. I much prefer it this way. I won't get into it again. However, I can see it as being a potential continuity problem. Ultimately, Dragon Fist Explosion, if Goku won't do it, who will, feels very much like its title attack. It doesn't make any sense, there's no reason for it to be there, it's hoping you're emotionally invested enough not to care, or at least to overlook those faults. And to its credit, it often succeeds, or comes close to doing so. As I've praised it, I worry I come across as too uncritical of it. But while nitpicking its flaws, I worry that I'm not giving it enough credit. Ambition is to be lauded, and this movie is full of that. However, loftier ambitions require loftier results, and the movie sometimes fails to deliver on them. I find myself confused. When I covered movie 12, I ended up liking it more than I remembered, but my expectations for it were kind of low to begin with. With this one, I liked it less than I remembered. It's my Piccolo arc conundrum again. Is it better when a meh story is executed well, or when a great story is executed a bit haphazardly? I still think this one is better overall, more worthy of my respect, but I can't help but walk away feeling more disappointed than I'd like to be. However, that's only because the movie was good enough to leave me wishing it was more. I remember in 2015 when I covered the first Dragon Ball Z movie, I lamented the idea of having to come up with things to say about 13 movies that I insisted are largely the same. Well, it's been a journey for me, and I think it's clear that my fears were unfounded. Look how long this video is. Even during the depths of adherence to formula, each of these movies brings its own unique problems and merits. There are certainly enough of them that work to break that formula, to carve out their own identity, this one being a prime example. So I in no way regret the decision to include these in Dragon Ball Dissection. I'm only sad that this is the last one of this original batch because they become some of the most fun I've had. Thank you for watching. My final cleanups before we launch into GT continue. Next time we'll already be returning to the Majin Buu arc, this time in animated form, to look at the differences, the additions, the subtractions to the original story. How many videos will that take? I'm not sure. 92 episodes is a lot to cover. You guys aren't in a hurry, right? I'll see you next time!